Shalom, shalom. I am Moray Amir Ryder, Moray of Torah Culture Assembly, and today we're going to do another lesson from the Hebrew Hermeneutics series. And this one is going to be called The Truth About Colossians 2 through 16 and 17. So, if I were to do a top five, let's say top five most misrepresented scriptures in the Bible, you will find Colossians 2:16 through 17 right up in there, along with Matthew 5:17, and pretty much anything that Paul says. So just take his epistles, put it in a hat, just take some stuff out, and I'm sure that's something that's been misrepresented from time and time again. And the interesting thing with this is I've seen even some of my Hebrew brothers teach this, and they did a noble job, but their lessons could have been better. There were some key things that were left out, but they're still useful. They're still lessons that a person can glean something from, but a lot of understanding is missing because they didn't go to the point that I'm going to go to. And so you'll see, I'll leave it there. So hopefully this is edifying to the Hebrew community, because these Hebrew hermeneutics lessons are for the new Hebrew, the newly awakened Hebrew, or the Christians that straddle in the fence or that has questions. And when they try to figure something out, Christianity funnels the same information that's been funneled into Christians for decades upon decades upon decades. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right on in it. So Colossians 2:16 through 17, let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Mashiach, or Christ, as is rendered in the text. All right, so I'm going to read this real quick. Perspectives of a Christian. So what I did was I just Googled something, explain Colossians 2:16 through 17, and this popped up. Now, I don't know if it'll pop up now because this is actually an older lesson that I did. I'm just redoing it. For that lesson is lost. The video of it is gone, so I just need to redo it. So I don't know if it'll pop up now, but I know this website that it came from is a popular website because even I used to use this website back when I was a Christian and I was trying to figure out stuff. Because I always had questions. So the website is called gotquestions.org. You know what I did when I had questions? I went to gotquestions.org, and they gave me back the typical answers that you would expect Christians to propagate. But here it is: perspectives of a Christian. As with the early churches, the issue of Jewish legalism in Colossus was of great concern to Paul. So radical was the concept of salvation by grace apart from works that those steeped in Old Testament law found it very difficult to grasp. That's something that's a common theme when they're trying to explain Paul and people don't really understand what Paul is talking about. They say it's about him attacking or going against the Jewish legalistic Jews, or the Judaizers. That's the term that I've heard so often used. The Judaizers. So these are people who are so strict in the law so they can't understand grace and stuff like that. And that's really, really a sad way to render Paul's writings. But here we go. Here's a quote that I like to use. It is from Dr. Roy Beecham in Ancient Near Eastern Covenants. This quote is about covenants. It's from something that was written about covenants. However, the quote is so fitting whenever you're using the scriptures that sometimes I'll just cite it just to remind people that they got to study the context. So it says, the study of any text of scripture divorced from its cultural setting and historical context is insufficient for formulating conclusions with regard to meaning. And I wanted to put that in this lesson in particular because if you do not study the cultural setting and historical context, you will not be able to understand exactly what's going on here. So you can make a half conclusion. You can be partially right. But once again, if you don't fully understand the cultural setting, and like I say, I've seen this lesson taught before, But a lot of the people I've seen teach it, and I haven't seen everyone teach it, so keep that in mind. But a lot of the people that I've personally seen teach it does not address the cultural setting and the historical context. And if you're doing that, if you're teaching these things without addressing these or without studying the backdrop of what's going on behind or what's causing the writing and the atmosphere and the social climate around there, then you're not going to be able to get that right. So let's move on. Key things to ask yourself. When was this written? Who was he writing to? Why was it written? Who was he writing about? Or what was he writing about? And what was the social climate during this time? Now, this is a good practice, not just for Colossians, but this is a good practice for any book of the Bible. Any book of the Bible, this is a good thing that you could start with if you're going to actually be able to teach something about this. These are points that you have to be able to investigate and get some type of understanding about, even if it's some approximate dates or approximate information. But you got to have some type of backdrop about what's going on, or you're going to draw the wrong conclusions. So one of the things that's so important on here is, who is he writing to? And what was the social climate during this time? Now, don't get me wrong. I investigated all these things. These are questions that I created. I investigated all of these things. But these are the two that I felt was most important. Who was he writing to? And what was the social climate like during this time? Those are the two things that you need to know to understand Colossians chapter 2, really chapter 2 as a whole. It's the rest of the chapter, when you look at it in context, just of the chapter itself, you should be able to ask questions. If you just isolate those two scriptures, verses 16 and 17, then this is what you're going to get. So here we go. Let's establish the context, right? Who was the author prior to his conversion? We know who the author is. The author is Paul, the brother Shaul. Now, one of the things you got to know about Shaul was that he was well studied in the Torah. He was well studied in the Hebrew scriptures. He was one of the best during his time, but he wasn't the best. The best during his time was someone that actually Shaul studied under. So Shaul was one of the best. He who studied under the best. And who was the best during this time? His name was Gamaliel. He is referenced in the text 2 times in Acts chapter 5 and I believe Acts 23. But either way, the scriptures is in a PowerPoint. But he studied under Gamaliel, and what Gamaliel would be, Shaul was a scholar, but Gamaliel, or Paul was a scholar, but Gamaliel would be like the scholar of scholars. You know how the Most High reference themselves as the God of gods. So, people may have their gods, but he is the God of those gods, which makes him the Most High. Gamaliel would be the scholar of the scholars. So those people who people looked up to, they was learning from this man right here. That's how important he was to those. So Shaul studied at the feet of this individual, known the scriptures inside and out, which is why he was able to be used in such a way by the Most High, because he once there was that divine intervention, and the Most High via his son revealed himself to Shaul. All those other things that Shaul had, or Paul had knowledge of, began to make sense. All right, but he was well studied. So here we go. Acts 5:34. But a Pharisee in the council named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in honor by all the people, stood up and gave orders to put the men outside for a little while. That's Gamaliel right there. He was a teacher of the law, and he was held in honor by all the people. What else do we got about Gamaliel? Acts 22:3. I am a Jew. This is Shaul talking. This is Paul talking. I am a Jew born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated at the feet of Gamaliel, according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for Yah, or God, as all of you are to this day. So he's telling you right then and there that he was well studied, and he has a He's traceable. You know who his teacher was. His teacher was the scholar of scholars. He was a man held in honor of, teacher of the law. That's who Shaul's or Paul's teacher was Gamaliel, and he was educated in a strict manner of the law. And he was very zealous, and you know, and you saw his zealousness because he was willing to put people to death because he thought they were in violation of the scriptures. He knew what the law was, and he was very zealous, but he was missing a key piece. But at this point, he has that key piece, so he's able to elaborate and teach the people who he's writing this to in Colossus what they should and should not be doing, how they should and should not be behaving, and XYZ. But let's go ahead and continue on. Acts 24:14. This is more about Paul, so you can get an idea of his character, because you really have to understand his nature to be like, is this even plausible that Paul will be just saying, don't do these things, don't worry about these things, let's throw all that away, when that's not even in his character. Acts 24:14, but I confess to you that according to the way, which they call a sect, and that's something else right there. I'm going to address that in a future video. The way, which they call a sect. So, and that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I worship the Elohim of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. So he's telling you that he believes the scriptures. He believes the Elohim of his fathers, and he believes in all things written in the law and the prophets. Sounds like somebody else I knew. By the name of Mashiach, who is often misquoted and misrepresented, who also believed in all things written in the law and the prophets, and until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle would be removed from those law and the prophets, or from that law and the prophets. So he's right here, he's establishing his belief system, he's establishing his foundation. Right now, people are coming at him, and he's correcting them like, no, this stuff y'all saying about me is inaccurate. It's not correct. This is what I believe in. I confess to you that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the Elohim of my fathers. I don't worship a different God. I don't worship a different Elohim. Believe in all things which are written. So what did Peter say about Paul? Peter, and this is so profound even to this day, because a lot of people should not be teaching Paul. If you don't know the Old Testament, you should not even be in the New Testament. Period. Let alone teaching Paul, because some of his stuff is confusing, and some of his stuff you gotta take a lot of study out of, or you gotta know where he's pulling certain principles from, or you're going to get it wrong. So for 2 Peter 3:15 through 16. An account that the long suffering of our Elohim is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul also according to the wisdom given unto him have written unto you, as also in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood. There's your warning right there. In which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable rest, as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction. That word rest, W-R-E-S-T, means to distort, to twist, or we can also say misrepresent. Just because this is clearly, like I say, so profound that it impacts the view of society today, because there are Christian teachers, pastors, leaders, ministers, bishops, whatever title that they want to give themselves, who don't understand this basic thing right here. There's stuff that he's saying that's hard to understand. So if you think what he's saying is probably clear as day, a lot of the times it's not. So you need to study the context. You need to go deeper and not just be surface level with everything that you come to your conclusion about. If you don't travel outside of the book of Colossians to figure out what's going on in Colossians, then you're in error. You're not going to figure it out. All right, but let's get back to it. Colossians 2:16 through 17. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, keyword, in meat, or in drink, keyword, or in respect of an holy day, key phrase, or of the new moon, You got to know what that means. Or of the Sabbath days, what is that all about? Which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Mashiach. Now, one thing I need to ask you right now before we move any further, how can something be a shadow? Shadow, what does that represent? But keep in mind that it's saying that is a shadow of things what? Not things that came, but a shadow of things to come, which means you're looking forward to something. You are looking off into the distance of something that should be coming towards you. It does not say a shadow of things that came or things that were fulfilled or things that has passed, but things to come. So just keep that in mind as we move on. Now, in order to establish the context within the letter itself, let's go towards the beginning of the letter. The first portion of the letter is talking about something completely different. Then he changes the tone. The theme of the letter changes, or the theme of the chapter changes, excuse me. So this is what we're going to begin to break down and see what he's saying, keeping in mind who the author is, all right? Because he did not abandon his faith. He said that who he studied under, that he believed in the Elohim of his fathers, that he is zealous for the law. All right, here we go. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Mashiach. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him who is the head of all principality and power. Okay, here we go. We got the highlighted words on the screen. Philosophy and empty deceit. Tradition of men according to the basic principles of the world. Now, if we just back up to the last slide, we go over a few things. We say, let no man judge you in meat or drink. Okay, that could be, you can wrap that up into philosophy and empty deceit, right? But then you got a perspective of a holy day. So if he, a Pharisee, study under Gamaliel, if he's referencing a holy day, what is he talking about? He's talking about their feast days. He's not talking about He's not talking about Christmas. He's not talking about Easter. He's not talking about none of these. He ain't talking about Lent. All right, he's talking about their holy days, Pesach, which is Passover. I forgot. I gotta use some of these words interchangeably. You got Passover. You got unleavened bread. You got these things, Sukkot, Shavuot, which is commonly known as Pentecost. You got tabernacles, you got trumpets, you got these things. These is what he was talking about, respect of a holy day. Then you got a new moon. So what does he mean by new moon? What is this deal with the new moon? What does that represent? You have to understand what that represents. But either way, as of right now, because we're going to touch on it, a new moon is not, back up to that slide or go forward. The new moon does not represent philosophy or empty deceit, okay? According to the tradition of men. None of these things that we have just listed, you can maybe say meat or drink, because that's ambiguous at this point. But with respect of a holy day, new moon, and then you have Sabbath days, these things are not philosophy, they're not empty deceit, and they're definitely not traditions of men. Because who gave the holy days? The Most High Yah. What is this new moon about? We're going to see, but it was instituted by the Most High Yah. And who gave the Sabbath days? The Most High Yah. So these are definitely not traditions of men. So already off the back in verse 8, you should be asking yourself questions as a reader and a study and as a student of the scriptures who have been told for so long that verses 16 and 17 mean something else. If you just know the character and nature of what Paul believes in from Paul himself and not your favorite pastor or teacher or some author who wrote some book to make a bunch of money, if you know what Paul have said about his own beliefs in the book of Acts, you would know that what he's saying is not regard to philosophy, empty deceit, traditions of men, or the basic principles of the world. None of that stuff that we just mentioned fall into that category. But let's move on. We go to verse 13. And you, being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses. Okay. I don't have this highlighted. I should have. But here we go. Having forgiven you all trespasses, because that's key, because what's coming up after that correlates to that. Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us. That's speaking as a whole, right? He didn't say that was against you. There's something you did or something that some handwriting of requirements that you had. He says against us. So he's speaking to Hebrews because he's a Hebrew. He's not speaking to Gentiles right now. I know that's what we want to believe. I know that's what we've been taught, but he's actually speaking to Hebrews. I'll teach on that another time, who he was actually teaching to, but he's talking to Hebrews right now. The handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out the way, having nailed it to the cross. This also has been misrepresented, this whole nail to the cross thing, but that's because people don't investigate what the handwriting of requirements mean. Having disarmed principalities and powers, and he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. What is the handwriting of requirements? You got to know this before you continue on with the chapter. We can't continue to just breeze through stuff and just take whatever it say. Otherwise, you're never going to break that chain of indoctrination. You have to ask questions. I know they told you don't ask questions or you're doubting. And if you doubt, you're going to hell because you don't believe in God. That's a lie. That's a lie. Ask questions. Study. Ask questions, study. If you want to be learned in this, then and you're in the Hebraic walk. Okay, now I'm drawing this line in the sand right now. I'm not talking to Christians right now. I'm talking to new believers or newly awakened Hebrews at this point. Sit under an elder who has been in this walk for a while. Don't just go at this at your own. You don't need to. There are people who've been on this walk for a while who can truly point you in a direction. Don't lean to your own understanding. Yes, we believe in this relationship that we're supposed to have with the Most High, but people don't really even fully understand that. But don't be afraid to ask questions, to reach out, to sit underneath an elder. And notice I didn't say your favorite teacher, because a lot of the favorite teachers, including myself, are younger. However, one positive that I have, that I will say, that I humbled myself and I've submitted under a man who is greater than me, who has more knowledge than me, and he adds to what I already know. And he adds to my direction. And if I have questions, I can seek guidance from him. And he also has an elder. So there's also a chain, a traceable link, right, of stewardship. But that's another story. Sorry about that. That's another story. But we're going to get back to that. But having nailed it to the cross, what are the handwriting of requirements? If you look up that word in Greek, and I'm not a fan of Greek, y'all know this. Well, most of you know it. I've said it on many occasions. But nevertheless, you have to be able to identify what's going on. At least you look at that word. It's only used one time. That is including the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek writing of the Bible. So it's a Greek version of the Bible. All right. So that's the Septuagint, including the Old Testament, the New Testament. That's what the Septuagint is. This word is only used one time. All right. So if you look it up, it is charagraphon, and it means a handwriting. Well, what one has written by his own hand. Now that's a little ambiguous. Go down to the next definition. A note of hand or writing, or which is handwriting, in which one acknowledges that money has either been deposited with him or lent to him by another to be returned to the appointed time. That doesn't really make sense in the context of what's going on if you just take that as face value, but what you have to meditate on that. What is this saying? That money has either been deposited with him or lent to him by another to be returned. So if something is lent to you to be returned, you know what that's called? It's like for lack of a better terms, that is a loan. But a better example of this, which would probably resonate a little bit more, is that there is a debt. All right. is money that's been deposited or lent to him by another to be returned at a point in time. That is a debt that needs to be paid. That debt needs to be paid at an appointed time. So let's continue. So now we have to go outside of the scriptures to figure out what this all means in more detail. So this word karagaphon is a legal term. It is used only once. I've already mentioned that. To find this word again, you got to go outside into extra biblical sources. So what this word constitutes is that it is like a legal document. It's a legal term, so it's like a legal document being presented in the courtroom that says, hey, this person is guilty of this crime. So if you signed off on a lease or something like that or something, and you defaulted on that and you are taken to court, they can say you signed this, you committed a crime that's punishable by law or enforceable by law, and then take it to the judge, and then the judge can enforce the law at this point because you owe this debt. So whatever that penalty was that was written in that lease, let's say it was to pay back the remainder of the lease. So if it's 3 months left, you got to pay those 3 months of monies that's due. But whatever the penalty of the law that you broke in your agreement, that's what this is. So this would be a legal document or written proof or evidence that someone is guilty or in debt. Such a document could be presented in a courtroom. It is a written record of a person's crimes. So yes, it surpasses even the example that I gave. So it's you have the courtroom still within that whole scheme and framework. You can still look at it as such because it's perfect to look at it in that manner, because at the end of the day, it's about judgment. It's about rendering judgment. All right. So it is a written record of someone's crimes, the laws that he has broken, and the penalty he owes for breaking the law. Now, just think about that in context of the scriptures. All right. We break the law, i.e. the Torah, i.e. the law of Yah, or what they consider the law of Moses, which even though is referenced as that, people have used that and put a negative connotation as if Moses created it, forgetting the complete fact that the Most High gave it to him, right? But the laws that he has broken and the penalty he owes for breaking the law. So when we broke the law, there are certain penalties that were due whenever we broke the law. Whenever we went against the law, statutes, and commandments, there are certain ordinances, there are certain judgments that's attached to different commandments. All of them are not the same. So the concept of all sin being equal, yep, that's not biblical. That's not a biblical thought. All sin is not equal. There are some sins that's punishable by death, and there are some are not. That's written in the book of John. You don't even need the book of John to even clarify that. All you got to do is actually read the Torah. All you got to do is read the first 5 books of Moses, as they call them, or Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And you can see that there's different judgments if you do certain things. Nevertheless, so if you break a law, then there is a certain judgment attached to that. So there's a concept within the text, especially the New Testament, that deeds are being recorded, whether good or bad. You will have to give an account for the things you do in the body. You're going to have to give an account for every idle word you speak. So imagine someone recording the things that you are doing when you are in violation. So of course you got some good deeds, but also within those good deeds, you got bad things that you're doing that is in violation of the law, statutes, and commandments. You are going against the judgments of the Most High. You're going against the commandments of the Most High. Therefore, there's a judgment rendered against you. Okay? This translates to a written record of the sins that a person has committed. This debt or receipt or record of trespass is what was nailed to the cross, not the law of Yah. Okay? So let me explain that. Let me break that down for you just a little bit more. So going back, and you have the person, or the, let's say, angel, or whoever is in charge of writing the deeds down of mankind. So you, the listener, you have committed certain sins that were punishable by death. And there is a judgment for those sins. But you want to know what was nailed to the cross? that document that they were writing, that whoever that person was, that investigator, that person who was observing you was writing down, that record of your sins was nailed to the cross when you came to Mashiach, when you came to Christ, the Messiah. That's what was nailed to the cross, not the law. It was those sins that you committed prior to coming to the Messiah. All right? That's what was nailed to the law. That's what was nailed to the cross, not the Mosaic law. All right? It's the record of your sins. The record of your sins. Understand that you have to understand that before you move on to the rest of this. So let no one judge you in food or drink or regarding festival or new moon or Sabbath, which again, we read that a few times. But one thing we need to make sure that we understand is the festivals and new moons. We know what some of these things are. Like I said, you got Passover, Shavuot, or Pentecost, the Feast of Trumpets, Tabernacles, unleavened bread, all these things. But the new moon. This is why I say it's not philosophy or empty deceit or traditions of men, because you got in Psalms 81:3, blow the trumpet in the new moon in the appointed time on our solemn feast day. All right, Numbers 28:11 through 15. At the beginning of your month, the new moon, whatever phase that you subscribe to. In the Hebraic community, there are different phases that people subscribe to for the new moon. However, there is one consensus that we have, is that whatever we consider to be the new moon is the beginning of the new month. That is consistent. All right. Numbers 28:11 through 15. At the beginning of your months, you shall offer a burnt offering to Yah, 2 bulls from the herd, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, a year old without blemish. These things are being instituted by Yah, by God. These things are being instituted. These are not traditions of men. Numbers 29:6. Besides the burnt offering of the new moon and its grain offering, and the regular burnt offerings, its grain offering, and their drink offering, according to the rule of them, for a pleasing aroma, a food offering to Yah. 1 Chronicles 23:31. And whenever burnt offering was offered to Yah on Sabbaths, new moons, and feast days, that's interesting that all of those things are in that sentence. You go back to the scripture, it says on festivals, which will be constituted as feast days, new moons, and Sabbath. Isn't that interesting? So that's 1 Chronicles 23:31. And I'm going to read it again. And whenever burnt offerings was offered to Yah on Sabbaths, new moons, and feast days, according to the number required of them regularly before Yahuwah. And 1 Samuel 20:5, David said to Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon. All right. And I should not fail to sit at the table with the king, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field to the 3rd day at evening. So, quick context. Go back to read 1 Samuel. I don't have a lot of time to go over that right now. But they were going to sit down and have dinner at the time of the new moon. They were going to sit down. Jonathan, his father, he was going to sit with the king. But David was already on the run from Saul at this time. You know, they had their complicated relationship going on. But this right here, if you go ahead and continue to read the narrative, but tomorrow is the new moon. That was a time where they would gather together. Okay? So let's keep these things in mind. So you got the festivals, the new moons, the Sabbaths. These are a shadow of things to come. All right, so let's continue. Now you go to verse 20. Now we're past 16 and 17. Let's go to verse 20. Therefore, if you died with Mashiach or Christ from the basic principles of the world, I hope that we're establishing these things. We already know what the Sabbath is. We know that's not man-made. We know that the feast days, we know Passover was not man-made. We know Pentecost, as they know it, is not man-made. We see, I just read the scriptures about the new moon. The Most High is giving directions on what to do on the new moon. The time of the new moon, blow the trumpet in the new moon, as Psalms 81:3 says. We know that it's not the basic principles of the world. Why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using according to the commandments and doctrines of men. Now, pause. Let's stop there. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. That could sound like it's going against what's written in the scriptures or written in Torah, like in Leviticus. You're not supposed to touch certain things that's unclean. You're not supposed to eat certain foods. You're not supposed to. I can understand that if you just took verse 21 by itself. But if you go on and read the very next verse, which says, which all concern things which perish with the using according to the commandments and doctrines of men, then you cannot honestly walk away with the same conclusion, because you have to stop, or you should stop. The student of the text, the student of the Bible should stop at this point and say, well, those things that's given in Leviticus is not a commandment of men. Even if you believe that is done away with, even if that is your position at this point, you have to understand that it's a commandment, or it was a commandment, but it was never a commandment of men. It was a commandment from the Father, from the Creator, the Most High. So you have a conflict in your understanding and what's written in the text. All you got to do is keep reading. Some of this stuff does just jump right out. But once again, this is what I say. If some stuff can be abused, some stuff could be twisted, some stuff can be distorted or misrepresented when you listen to Paul, you're reading his writings. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. If you just leave it at that, because that is a verse, then yeah, you can come off with some poor conclusions. But all you got to do is read the next verse. Verse 23 says, these things indeed have a appearance of wisdom in self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. It's time to ask your questions. Something deeper is going on here. Something much deeper is going on. Okay? He says, appearance of wisdom, self-imposed religion. The religion of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the religion of our forefathers was not self-imposed. The religion that Paul had prior even to his conversion was not self-imposed, right? It was what was given to them by the Most High, and it was passed down to successive generations. But it was what was given to them. You got false humility, and neglect of the body. What are they talking about? This going back to that don't touch, don't taste, don't handle. That's neglect. But are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. See, if you come to these these 4 scriptures, and you do not go to search deeper on these things, then you will come across, even if you come across with the understanding that, hey, yes, we are supposed to keep these things, or that he's not saying something negative towards the feast days and Sabbath, you won't fully come to grasp with what's going on here. You got to go dig in. This do not touch, do not taste, don't handle. You see it's in quotes. I didn't put that in quotes. Someone is saying that. Someone is saying that. Who is saying that? We got to figure out who's the one who he's quoting right here. What group, person, individual, sect, religion, value system, what is he quoting right here? Paul does quote other Greek philosophers and stuff like that, just in case you didn't know. It's nothing wicked or nefarious about it, but he does do it. So let's move on. We're almost done with this lesson, but it's about to get real wordy. I will tell you that right now. So on trial, the issue of Jewish legalism in Colossus was of great concern to Paul. So we're basically putting that common theme, that common mentality to question. We're putting it on trial, since we brought up the courtroom examples earlier. We're putting that thing on trial. Is the evidence for Jewish legalism in Colossus, does it stack up? What does the jury say? The jury would say not guilty on that. So if it's not guilty on that, then you got to figure out who or what was the guilty party. And now it's about to get wordy. Gnosticism. Gnostics. That's who he was talking to. Excuse me, that's who he was talking about. He was talking to Hebrews about Gnostics. A common theme in the New Testament is Gnosticism. Several people address it. But you got to know the traits of Gnosticism to be able to figure that out. But we're going to go here. So once again, I say this is going to get wordy, so I'm just about to read these things off for you and elaborate when necessary. But I'm not going to give too much of my opinion because I'm quoting sources right here, and I think they're pretty good at saying whatever they need to say. All right. Here we go. Consensus on the definition of Gnosticism has proved difficult. The groups conventionally classified as Gnostic did not constitute a single movement with relatively homogeneous organization, teachings, and rituals. So that's kind of like the Hebrew awakening, where you can grab 100 Hebrews, put them in a room, and you're going to have different beliefs. You're going to have different viewpoints, different perspectives, all on the same text. And some of them will conflict, and you will have debates and arguments and stuff like that, because it is not a homogeneous organization. It is not. They do not have homogeneous teachings. All right. Even a self-designation Gnostic is problematic, since it is attested for only some of the traditions conventionally treated as Gnostic, and its connotations are ambiguous, whereas some researchers argue that the term Gnostic should be restricted to the sects or schools that call themselves by that name. Others extend that category to include additional religious movements that allegedly share various distinctive features. Let me continue. Another frequently encountered theme is that there is a special class or race of humans that is descended from the transcended realm and is destined to achieve salvation and to return to its spiritual origins. That's Gnosticism to a T. Salvation is understood as revelation that awakens knowledge, or the gnosis, of the race's divine identity. In contrast, now, real quick, the person who where this is coming from is still under a Christian thought. Sometimes you got to chew the meat, spit out the bone. So you're still going to use certain terms, and but nevertheless, that doesn't necessarily take away from the accuracy of what's being said. In contrast, the traditional Christian emphasis is on redemption through the death and resurrection of Yahushua HaMashiach, or the one they call Jesus Christ. Although the myth of a demiurge and the theme of reawakened awareness of divine origins has parallels in Platonic and Neo-Pythagorean philosophy, and in fact were partly derived from those traditions, it is often asserted that the Gnostic myths there is a far sharper dualism involving a much more negative attitude toward the inferior creator God, the material cosmos, and the human body. So one thing about Gnosticism, one common theme, and that's actually going to come up soon. One common theme is that the body, which is matter, is bad. Matter is bad. So one thing you have to do is you have to escape the body. So that causes the person to neglect the body in ways to free their spirit. The only true thing that's going to quote unquote free their spirit is the gnosis, the knowledge of their divine reality. And that's how they're supposed to be able to get to this point. But let me continue. In Oriental dualism, says Professor Bousset, it is within this material world that the good and evil powers are at war, and this world beneath the stars is by no means conceived as entirely subject to evil. Gnosticism has combined the two, the Greek opposition between spirit and matter, and the sharp Zoroastrian dualism, where the Greek mind conceived of a higher and lower world, saw instead of two hostile worlds standing in contrast to each other like light and darkness. Here we go. This is key. And out of the combination of these two dualisms arose the teaching of Gnosticism with its thoroughgoing pessimism, and is fundamental asceticism. That's the word right there. Excuse me. That's the word, asceticism. That's key. That word right there is key to unlocking Colossians. Excuse me, chapter 2 anyway. That word right there, asceticism. So here are some common themes presented in philosophy of Gnosticism. We're going to break down what asceticism is, because that's, once again, is key, and a light bulb is going to go off. Number one, a claim on the part of the initiated to a special knowledge of the truth, a tendency to regard knowledge as superior to faith, which is, is a contrast to how we respond, although a lot of Hebrews act like that to this day. The knowledge is superior to faith, but that's a completely different story. That's not what Paul's talking about. And as the special possession of the more enlightened. Number two, the teaching on the one hand of asceticism as the means of attaining to spiritual communion with God or the divine, a denial of the humanity of Christ. So I'm sorry, this is number three. A denial of the humanity of Christ called a docetic Christology, which looked upon the earthly life of Christ as unreal. Keep that in mind, because I'm going to point that out later. I'm going to read it one more time because it's important, even though it has nothing to do per se with Colossians, but you're going to see how I said that this is being addressed in other portions of Scripture. So if you're not familiar with Gnosticism, you won't understand the backdrop, at least, of most of the New Testament. Number three, one more time, a denial of the humanity of Christ called a docetic Christology, which looked upon the earthly life of Christ as unreal. Somehow I skipped number four. Number five, a separation of matter and spirit, with matter being evil and the source from which all evil has arisen, a goal of escaping the prison of the body. So they consider that the body is a prison, which is the reason why they don't like the Creator God, because the Creator God, known as the Most High Yah, created the body for their spirits to dwell in, and they think the body is evil, so they think the Creator God, i.e. the Most High Yah, is evil for creating that body for them to dwell in. Strange. Number six, the scriptures of the Old Testament were ascribed to the demiurge or inferior creator of the world. That's how they view the Most High, who was the God of the Jews, but not the true God. So they think that the Most High is not the true God, and he's just the God of the Jews. And number seven, salvation is based not on faith or works. Think about that. One of the arguments within the Hebraic circles, even, with Paul, and you think about some of the stuff he said, which is misunderstood as well. Faith apart from works. You got James that's saying faith without works is dead. And then this right here, Gnostics like, salvation is not based on faith or works. So all y'all are wrong. I'm saying that's how Gnostics are responding. Or obedience to divine laws. So that cancels out everything that they stand for. Salvation based not on faith or works or obedience to divine laws, which is the concept of the Hebrews. Is faith plus works plus obedience to divine laws. Actually, the works really consist of the obedience to divine laws, but through a special knowledge or gnosis of one's true condition or the divine spark. All right. Here we go. Asceticism, a little bit more I told you it was going to get a little wordy, but to truly understand this, I think it's necessary. I think it's very necessary if you fully want to understand this, and really to prove my point of what I'm saying, that it's Gnosticism that was his argument against. It was not Hebrews. It was not legalism. It was not none of the stuff that's commonly perpetrated by people who don't know what the heck they're talking about. From this theoretical basis arose another error, that as sin is inherent in the material substance of the body, therefore the only way which perfection can be reached is to punish the body by asceticism, so that through the infliction of pain and the mortification of the flesh, the reign of pure spirit may be reached. What does that sound like? That sounds like you have the appearance of holiness, or the appearance of righteousness, or the appearance of wisdom, to punish the body by asceticism, so that through the infliction of pain and the mortification of the flesh, the region of pure spirit may be reached, and thus man may be etherealized and become like who? God. People have been trying to become like God since the garden. Ain't nothing changed. Ain't nothing changed. It comes through back in a different form. It pops its head up in just a different form. That's all that happens. There's nothing new under the sun. This ascetic tendency is wonderfully widespread, and it appears century after century. I forgot that was even in there, but that's literally what I was just saying. And it shows itself in many forms of religion, not merely in distorted forms of Christianity, but in the Hindu religions and Buddhism and elsewhere. In the epistle to the Colossians, ironically, he references it. I'm saying ironically because I forgot that this was in here. Like I said, I taught this a long time ago. So now I'm going back through it and I forgot this was even here. In the epistle to the Colossians, accordingly, there are definite references to ascetic practices which were inculcated by the false teachers at Colossus. The very terms which they employed have been preserved. Touch not, taste not, handle not. Interesting. Remember, he was quoting someone when he put that in there. He put it in quotes. I didn't put that in quotes. Paul did. Touch not, taste not, handle not. It was in this way that these teachers had at their own hand invented a worship different from that of the Christian faith, which endeavored to attain the deliverance of the soul by neglecting of the body. These ascetic practices were afterward taught by various Gnostic sects. Let me go back to the scripture real quick, because now that we read that, let's see what it says. Okay, therefore, this is verses 20. We're going to read 20 through 23. Therefore, if you die with Mashiach from the basic principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Here's the regulations. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men. There you go, commandments and doctrines of men. These things indeed, they do have an appearance of wisdom in, what is that? Self-imposed religion. What religions is that? Forms of Christianity, Hindu, Buddhism. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body. Neglect of the body. Why were they neglecting the body? Because they felt that that's the way that they can connect with the divine spark and get back and get the gnosis and connect back to what they believe is God. Neglect of the body, but are no value against the indulgence of the flesh. I hope this is starting to make sense now. So asceticism, the actual definition, is the practice of strict self-denial, i.e., don't touch, don't taste, don't handle, as a measure of personal and especially spiritual discipline, the condition, practice, or mode of life of an ascetic. Is rigorous abstinence from self-indulgence. What's the last word he's saying here? But are no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Come on, people, we got to go deeper. What's really going on here in the text? We got to start figuring this stuff out and can't just keep regurgitating what everybody else is saying. All right, so I'm not going to read all of this. I'll read some of the rare portions just for the lack of time at this point. But you can always pause the screen and read it yourself. But asceticism, the practice of the denial of physical or psychological desires in order to obtain a spiritual ideal or goal. Hardly any religion has been without at least traces or some features of asceticism. And that's true. There are some traces even in the Hebrew faith. And I'm not talking about the Hebrew community that we know of today. I'm talking about in the actual text itself. So one of those means is fasting. Okay, so that is a trace of asceticism, but it is not an ascetic, i.e. religion, or it's not a ascetic way of life, because they only fast in the effort to really get the favor of the Most High for like protection when they're on a road or some type of intervention. It was not a way of life for them in regards to just doing this just consistently and constantly, and everywhere you go people are fasting, and they're promoting fasting all the time. That's not actually, you see them feasting, you see them celebrating, and that goes back to the whole new moon, the Sabbath, the holy days. These were times of celebration, these were times of communing with each other, these were times of getting together, and the complete opposite of a denial of self-indulgence. And I'm not saying that they were just out of control eating and living it up like we would do on some of these secular holidays in the past, right? Nevertheless, these were times that they were not trying to abstain from food. That's the point. These are times they're not trying to abstain from food. They're not going to abstain from food on these days. So yes, there are traces in the Hebrew faith, but it is not a pinnacle of Hebrew faith. So abstinence and fasting are by far the most common of all ascetic practices. Even personal hygiene also fell under condemnation among ascetics. In the dust of the deserts, I'm not going to read all of that. I'll just jump down to the last red portion. Once again, pause the screen if you want to read it. Asceticism is in the form of seclusion, physical discipline, and the quality and quantity of food prescribed has played an important role in connection with the puberty rites and rituals of admission into the tribal community. One community that may fit into a category like that from the Hebrew community, which would still be considered an offshoot, would be like the Qumran community. They secluded themselves and they had different types of the rites before you can get admission to the community. But once again, that is a offshoot community, stuff like that. From Britannica.com, in Hellenistic culture, asceticism in the form of fasting and refraining from sexual intercourse was practiced by communities of the religio-mystical character, including the Orphics and the Pythagoreans. Judaism, because of its view that God created the world and that the world, including man, is good, is non-ascetic in character and includes only certain ascetic features, such as fasting for the strengthening of prayer and for gaining merit. Though some saw a proof of holiness of life in some ascetic practices, i.e. Qumran community, a fully developed ascetical system of life has remained foreign to Jewish thought, and ascetic trends could therefore appear only in the periphery of Judaism. All right. And real quick, Docetism. What this basically is, I'll just read it. One of the earliest Christian sectarian doctrines affirming that Christ did not have a real or natural body during his life on earth, but only an apparent and phantom one, though it is through his forms are alluded in the New Testament, such as in the letters of John. It has become more fully developed as an important doctrinal position of Gnosticism and religious dualist systems of belief arising in the 2nd century AD, which held that matter was evil and the spirit is good, and claimed that salvation was attained only through esoteric knowledge or gnosis. Once again, these people who are putting together these encyclopedias, they are aware of these connections, but for some reason the Bible readers and the Bible students and the people who hold their faith, and a lot of these people who write these things don't even really subscribe to the faith of the Bible in most any form, but yet they still know the connections. But this is what I wanted to point out. So this right here, Docetism, is a form or is basically a tenet of Gnosticism. It's believing that someone who was as righteous and pure as the Messiah could not have been a real person, not saying that his spirit didn't exist, but he didn't exist in a body because he was too pure. So here we go. Here are a couple of times where it's mentioned in the text. 1 Timothy 6:20-21. O Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust, avoiding the profane and idle babblings and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge, by professing it some have strayed concerning the faith. 1 Timothy 4:3, forbidding to marry. That, what is that? That's neglecting the flesh, right? That's abstaining from sex, and commanding to abstain from foods. Now, I've seen people abuse this in the Hebrew community, the commanding to abstain foods, because there are certain people who believe that chicken is unclean, and there's people who believe that all meat is unclean, so you're supposed to be either a vegetarian or vegan. And I've heard them quote this scripture to try to prove their point, and that's just horrible. That's just a horrible understanding of the text. It really is. It's really it's so far off of a misrepresentation. And I can't believe that we have Hebrew teachers who are teaching stuff like that. This clearly has nothing to do with us. If you know anything about the backdrop of the New Testament, you know that has nothing to do with us. This is all about Gnosticism. But you gotta study. You gotta dig deeper. And I'm no expert. I'm no scholar. I never claim to be a scholar, but I do study, and I do search the context of what's going on when stuff are written in the Bible. I do that. So, and once again, 1 Timothy 4:3, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from foods which Yah created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. And 1 John 4:1-3, beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Yahushua HaMashiach, the one they call Christ, has come in the flesh is of God. If they say he came in the flesh, they are of God. And every spirit that does not confess that Yahushua HaMashiach has come in the flesh is not of God. That's Gnosticism. That's the docetic trace of Gnosticism. And this is the spirit of who? The Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, but wait, and is now already in the world. They were dealing with it then. There's still people who believe that now, but they were dealing with it then in their time. Gnosticism. Hallelujah. Hopefully this is edifying, because we're at the end of it right now. But I pray that this was edifying for you all. So we got a quick recap right here. Let's go ahead and recap. So now let's read it, understanding that we know what these things mean. So let no one judge you in food or in drink. Think about that, food or drink. What did we just read about? Asceticism. This is abstaining from these things. So let no one judge you. You who eat food, and you who drink, and you who celebrate festivals, and you who celebrate new moons and keep Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things, once again, to come. Is not something that's done away with, but the substance is of Mashiach. All right, let's keep going. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels. I skipped this verse earlier in the thing, so I'm glad it came up here. So verses 18 and 19, I know we end up jumping to 20. You know the Hebrews ain't worshiping angels. You know that. You should know that. And if you don't, you shouldn't be teaching out this book. 18, let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the increase that is from Yah. Continue. Therefore, if you die with HaMashiach from the basic principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men, These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Gnosticism. Has nothing to do with legalism. Has nothing to do with Jews or any of that stuff. The philosophy that they were combating was Gnosticism. So, to sum this up, Paul was not saying, do not let anyone judge you for not keeping a Sabbath, new moon, or feast days. He was not saying that. What he was saying to those Hebrews in Colossus, because they were the only ones, we know they was bruised, because they were the ones who were keeping the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the feast days. All right? He was saying, don't let anyone judge you for keeping these things. One word difference, right? Don't let anyone judge you for keeping these things. Don't let anyone judge you for keeping the Shabbat. Don't let anyone judge you for keeping the new moon, celebrating new moon. Don't let no one judge you for feasting on feast days. Don't let anyone judge you for eating meat or for drinking drink. Don't let anyone do this. You know they drink wine as well. Don't let anyone judge you for drinking these things. That's what he was saying. I hope that you got something out of this. So this is it. Hebrew Hermeneutics, part 3, the truth about Colossians 16 through 17, with a sidebar on the whole nail to the cross part. So I hope this, once again, hope this was edifying. Hope you were able to get something out of this. Let's continue to seek the Most High. Why should we continue to seek Him? Because He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. All right? So, I am Moray Amir Ryder, Moray of Torah Culture Assembly, and until next time, peace and shalom.